Hi everybody, welcome to our first Knowing Circle for A Squared E Squared. Thanks very much for joining us today on the 7th of December at 4:02 Melbourne time. I'd like to welcome everybody to today, those who have joined us here from across the country. We've got WA represented, Queensland, South Australia, Northern Territory, Victoria, New South Wales. Fantastic. So it's great to see you all here. I will now hand over to Mark, who's going to lead us in the presentation. We'll then open up for discussions. You have in your inbox, hopefully, the chapter reports. We'll draw out some ideas from those towards the end, and we'll aim to finish by 5:30. So thanks very much, everybody, and over to you, Mark.
Hi everyone. I think I'll disappear for a period of time because I'm going to share my my screen with you in good, good old Wednesday afternoon teaching mode. I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you all, so you don't get to look at me. You get to look at all the other stuff. So here we go. Oh, I'm being given all these options. There we go. Now, I presume with some thumbs up, you'll be able to see my screen. Great. Okay. Yes, as Peter's introduced, thanks very much. Welcome to our first Learning Circle. This afternoon, I'm going to take you through some work that we've been doing in New South Wales in relation to, I suppose, essentially learner-centred pedagogies. And there was some discussion about this at the conference in Adelaide, and that follows on from some discussions that we've had in a number of A Squared, E Squared conferences. And I suppose it follows on from some of the newer approaches that teachers are using in their classrooms. I hope this doesn't sound all too schooly, but part of the discussions I think we would like to get into this afternoon is what does this also tell us for community education programs that may be run by some of our members in local government, government agencies, with community organisations and communities groups. So we'll have a little bit of a think and a discussion about the learner-centred pedagogies. We'll look at some benefits and challenges. The example or the context I'll use is the sustainability action process, which is a student investigation action learning scaffold that has been put together. It has got a little bit of a history, and we'll go through that. And then we might have a look at some solutions, for making this approach easier for practitioners in the classroom. So let's get going. When we use a phrase like learner-centred pedagogies, I suppose we really do need to unpack it. And there's a lot of expressions, and we've got just a handful of them on the screen now that a lot of people use almost interchangeably. And all of these, we see evidence of all or some of these in a whole lot of classrooms. We know that some of our better and more engaged students, I suppose, demonstrate stronger learning when they are put in charge of some of their own learning. So one of those phrases there, students as leaders of their own learning, I suppose is one of my favourites. It carries with it some of those notions of self-determination, which I think when we think about environment, sustainability, making young people agents of their own action, I think there's something there for allowing young people the space and freedom to actually determine some of their own pathways for learning. And we'll get into some of the issues related to that, because statements and phrases like that can be mightily scary for some teachers. And in the past, that would have been a phrase that would have frightened me. There's plenty of research, and I've just pulled out two tiny phrases out of a couple of pieces of research that I've looked at and used in the past in relation to processes, practitioners, classroom environments, investigations, activities, student learning programs that encourage students to actually map their own pathway, define and decide on what they want to learn, and how that gives them, I suppose, a different response to that learning process. One of the things you'll notice in there is that both of these phrases, and this is why I've chosen them, is that this really puts the learner or the student as an active sort of driver and director of their learning, as opposed to, as in the right hand says, as more of a passive recipient of the knowledge. And so I think when we sort of look at these statements and unpack some of them, we actually think that look at this as a very different way of learning to, I know, a lot of the learning that I experienced as a student when I was younger. Part of the discussion around this is looking at acknowledging and understanding what are the benefits, what's the upside, and then what's the downside. Because if we're looking to shift teacher practice, we need to have, number one, evidence, and we need to identify what are those actual benefits that come from this. So again, some of the research that I've used in the past, I've just pulled out a number of phrases out of a few pieces of research. I do have some referencing at the end as well on one of the last slides that will be included with this. There's a number of pieces of research that I went back and had a look at, and when some of the environmental education people nationally were being consulted for the Australian curriculum, there were some pieces of research that we looked at where some of these phrases are coming from. So things like skills and practices that enable lifelong learning. We don't want this to be short-term, limited pathways that are only applicable to a small number of contexts. Some of the approach that we want to build in young people, the capacity we want to build in young people, has benefit well beyond the life within their school. A number of the sort of responses and pieces of evidence I'll bring out this afternoon also draw on a 5-year program called the Climate Clever Energy Savers, funded by New South Wales Department of Education, New South Wales Environment, and the New South Wales Climate Change Office, starting in the late 200s and lasting for 5 years. Part of that was very much looking at the professional learning support that we would provide to teachers for project-based learning. And so we do need to acknowledge that project-based learning, student-centered pedagogies, inquiry process can be challenging for a teacher or practitioner in the classroom that may have had limited exposure to this through their pre-service training, may not have the support of faculty or leadership in their school, may have management issues within their own classroom that they feel they need to be on top of first before they actually, release or let go of some of the controls over the learning pathways. And that first dot point there, it is actually harder to manage, contain, in inverted commas, the learning when it comes to project-based learning, student-centered pedagogies, because the track or pathway that the learner takes may not be linear. It may be circular, it may be messy, it may zigzag back and forward. They may choose to adopt a just-in-time learning approach, so they get partway down a track to solving something, realise they need to do some more, knowledge development and dart off to the side, come back to the problem, and then continue. In the era of individual learning programs for students, it is sometimes harder to track individual student learning progress when you have a more open and negotiated pathway along which students progress. It's sometimes difficult to manage the time that is allocated because an open inquiry project-based approach does not always fit neatly into a 10-week program, into 5 periods of learning per week, into a 40-minute time slot or whatever it is. So when we look at learner-centred approaches, inquiry approaches, sometimes the boundaries waver back and forth. Sometimes it can be messy. Some teachers lack also a really strong scaffold. When we were developing the scaffold that we'll have a look at in a moment, we actually looked very much at history, science and geography as areas of learning or subjects that actually have quite defined processes that they rely on. So for example, if you look at a science investigation or an experiment type methodology, it's very, it is the backbone of that science investigation, and teachers and students can rely on the structure and nature of that pathway. So we looked at existing pathways for this process. So in a moment, we might actually have a bit of a chat about or we might have a little bit of a chat about what we find, or if we do find these sorts of approaches difficult or challenging. And I have somehow lost my. No, here you all are. I can see you all again now. I'm not sure how we'll manage this. Facilitator, what do you think? Will we take people off mute and then have a bit of a conversation around this?
That sounds great, Mark.
Okay. I've put a couple of prompt questions there, 3 prompt questions for people for us to get started. Now, I know they are fairly schooly type questions, so people who are current practitioners or people who are working in the area of teacher education would certainly be able to think their way into this.
Mark, if I might just help you out there with a bit of facilitation, if everyone could use the chat feature and maybe let everyone know that you have a question, and then perhaps I can help direct conversation. Maybe that will be useful. In some other tools, we have a little hand up process, but I don't think everyone can see everyone right now. So would that help if we use the chat feature in that way? Okay, so I don't know, Graham, you have yourself off mute. Do you have a question to start with, and everyone else can go?
Well, I guess it's half question, half statement, but my background in coming through this stuff was from many years ago when I was in the education system as an advisor around technology and these same issues. And I mean, Mark just went through a whole bunch of pedagogical stuff that we were working on, and when I look at it now, it was 25 years ago. So it's an interesting thing that it's still front and centre in schools 25 years later, and looking at it in a different context. But we're certainly working on some projects at the moment which fit Mark's stuff to a glove. I mean, the biodiversity schools project that we're working on up here is designed around those sort of pedagogies. It's also designed to provide a scaffolding system for student processes and for teachers, and it's been having great success. So the pilot at Waggaman's been demonstrating a lot of those things. I mean, one of the things I also find interesting is that teachers are still very reluctant to really let go of those reins and let people really take off on some of those student-centred learning things, although they do allow our kids a bit more flexibility and a bit more scope on that. And one of the things that's been interesting is trying to convince the teachers to fully let go. And I don't think they're quite ready for that yet, but they're getting as they see how these things work and how they see the importance of student energy and enthusiasm and how that really carries through so much stuff around this learning they're trying to generate, they're feeling more and more comfortable, I think, with letting things go a bit. So I think the stuff Mark's been through is pretty good. But the two things that I would throw into it that are really important, I think, is the helping teachers with the understanding of the scaffolding process and letting things run a bit, knowing that it's not going to fly off the rails. And that points to the other one, which is the professional development process that needs to be put in place to help teachers develop that confidence. That'd be my thoughts.
I'm just going to respond to that one really quickly, Graham. Particularly that last part, when we were doing the climate change project, our teachers fell into two really clear groups. Because it was on climate change, we had one group that felt that they couldn't teach this with their students because they didn't know enough technically about renewable energy, for example, or solar energy or whatever. And that would have been, nearly half the group. The other half felt that, okay, they may not know enough, but at least they had a really strong scaffold with which to work. And so they then saw themselves as the facilitator and the students really as the learner. So, that's that little bit of evidence just from that one program that we facilitated, that we managed out of Department of Ed a few years ago. It shows that to be, that our teachers do need professional learning support with the knowledge and professional learning support with the actual process. Any other comments?
Hilary has a comment, I think.
Yeah, I've just, it's sort of jumping to the second bit there about the barriers. And one of the things that's often not mentioned is the political barriers to existing research and existing work that's been done in the area. And this sort of follows on from what Graham was saying, actually. Can everyone hear me, by the way? It sounds like a cave where I'm... And when I'm listening to what Mark is saying, not to undermine any of that, but it just reminds me of all the work that was done in Queensland throughout the 90s on the social investigation strategy and Telstar and the metacognition and all of those sort of scaffolding investigation processes and student-based learning that was put in place. And because a lot of that work, it was done through praxis, so it was really with teachers and professional development in the classroom, a lot of it doesn't appear in academic research or papers. So when you're searching for various work that's been done or been successful, there was not that same tradition of evaluating everything in an academic sense or putting out papers or publishing it. And then what unfortunately happens is there's a lot of reinvention of the wheel, and that sort of information or that corporate knowledge is not captured. And then being very subversive, jumping to that barrier, one of the reasons why that is lost and why that is closed down, in my opinion, and I've said this a few times, but I haven't done the research into it, is the fact that student-based learning, critical and constructive pedagogy is actually very dangerous from a politician's point of view, because actually they don't really want students or teachers questioning issues such as climate change. And I know that does sound very subversive, but really it is also quite a valid reason for why those sorts of approaches are closed down. And we found that very particularly when we were doing the SOAS national curriculum back in the 90s, when we had the SOAS wars that were stirred up by various commentators like Andrew Bolt and so on, and then it became a big, huge sort of fight over this syllabus, which had a lot of these pedagogies actually embedded within that syllabus. And that was one of the issues there, was really, we don't want people questioning the status quo and changing it. It was actually said to me at one point by someone very high up when I was in the bureaucracy in Education Queensland. So I just want to throw in that barrier to this sort of pedagogy. And I think what it comes down to is actually transferring that practice into research, so that sort of stuff in the past has been captured, and also developing resilience of this, because without resilience, you do go through these waves of reinventing the wheel and losing all of that corporate knowledge and those pedagogies that were developed in the years before.
Thanks very much, Hilary, and thanks, Graham, for your questions and comments. Also, thanks to Snowy and Cam and Dave for making comments on the chat. Mark, maybe we'll go back to you now for some more of your presentation. You're on mute, Mark.
Thank you, Chair, Facilitator. A lot of the work and thinking that has gone into, I suppose, this area from my experience, and a lot of the work in New South Wales that's going on, comes out of the work that we did for the Sustainability Curriculum Framework and for the Climate Clever Energy Savers. So if I start with the framework first, this was a document that New South Wales Department of Ed, Department of Environment and the Australian government, when they were interested in environmental education, put together. And it was essentially a, as it says, a guide for curriculum developers and policymakers. And it looked at, we knew that the national curriculum was on the horizon. We knew that sustainability would have some kind of feature in it. But according to the Melbourne Declaration, how deeply embedded or what kind of structure and scope that actually had was yet to be seen. And so we had been doing a number of projects in New South Wales. And so we looked at, could we provide a generic scaffold or a scaffold for student inquiry and action? What did it need to contain in terms of knowledge, and what kind of approaches did we want kids to take? So the Sustainability Action Process is the name of the methodology. It's a 5-step process. And when we have a look in a second at some of the learning materials we've just published online, you can see how we've structured this. We knew that kids needed a knowledge of both ecological and human systems, as sustainability is a conversation between and an interaction between those two sets of systems. And we knew that we wanted kids to bring certain approaches. I was never in love with the phrase repertoires of practice, but there it is. That's a phrase designed by a committee, as beautiful as it is. But we knew that kids had to bring certain dispositions, and that's one of the words I wanted to use, towards this world viewing, systems thinking, and futures and design thinking. This document's still available. It's on the Australian Government Department of Environment website. A number of the elements of this document were integrated into the sustainability cross-curriculum priority. So we'll get straight into then how have we done this? So we had a 5-year program called the Climate Clever Energy Savers, and we essentially tested out that methodology. We looked at how effective it would be for both supported learning, as in teacher-directed or teacher-supported learning, and how good it would be for student self-directed group learning, project-based learning. We had it evaluated by UTS, and it was evaluated at 2 different milestones of the project. We've subsequently, from 2014, when the second evaluation was being done, we actually looked at what were the areas then within the Australian curriculum that would benefit from this approach being used more widely. And so over the last 18 months, the Department of Education, environmental education centres, with the support of the New South Wales Office of Environment and Heritage, which is my day job, we have developed the sustainability action process across 7 sustainability areas, and we've differentiated those for primary and secondary. So there are essentially 14 new learning objects, some of which have just been published. So the first 6 have been published. They're available on Scootle, and over the next couple of weeks and into the early new year, we'll be doing plenty of advertising, both state, New South Wales, and nationally. And we'll push that out wherever we can. I might just have a look at, we might just go and have a look at one. So I'll see if I can bring this up, and we'll see if this magically turns into, can you all still see my desktop? And has a new image appeared? Great, okay. We won't go into each of the parts, I'll just show you, just a quick demonstration, okay. We'll start at the technical and very dry bits. We've got the links to Australian curriculum, the links to New South Wales syllabus. Seeing it was as written by New South Wales, we thought we'd pop ourselves in there prominently. We've got teacher notes, this is the how-to. The most important document here is the learning journal, where students either individually or in groups monitor and record their learning. We went for a whole range of different complex sort of tools. Did we do it in OneNote? Did we do it in Google Docs? Did we do it in the cloud? And we came back to something that was the simplest method that kids of all ages can use. Sure, it may not be the sexiest thing, but a Word document is pretty flexible and pretty easy. So we have kids embedding videos, dropping their data in, writing text, putting in pictures, tables of graphic of data from their investigations. So on page 1 or in tab 1, we have got our 4 support documents in that right-hand column. Each of the 7 sustainability areas, the energy, water, waste, biodiversity, etc., have got the 5 steps to the sustainability action process: making the case for change, defining the scope for change, developing the proposal, implementing the proposal, reflecting and evaluating. And as we click through each of those tabs, different sets of information pop up. This actual material has been developed by the learning designers in the Department of Education, so that's why it's been published through the Department of Education New South Wales Learning Portal, and that's why then there's an automatic publication through to Scootle. And we thought that was the easiest way and most, I suppose, the way that all schools will be able to access this. When we look at how we've scaffolded this, and I'll just pop open a couple of these. For each of the areas that we think that students need to examine, think about, learn about, research, we've created small question scaffolds for them. So for the example, in terms of exploring biodiversity, it's important for them to know, for them to reflect on what do they know about living things. It's important for them to think about where they'll find out more about biodiversity in their school or local environment. And then that question about what does biodiversity have to do with sustainability? Bit of a broader question, okay? So this sort of sets up the inquiry process for them. This next set of text has links to online resources embedded in it. And so whilst this is, you know, essentially a piece of narrative text with questions, it actually, approaching this and unpacking this helps kids answer these questions. And then these questions also appear in their learning journal for them to document their learning. So this is taking a constructivist approach to building the knowledge first. The evidence, the research and consulting with kids in this area of sustainability really clearly defined for us that it needed to have a solid anchor, it needed to have an action component, and it needed to have the opportunity for the kids to actually do something. That was very clearly stated by all of the teachers and all of the evidence. So as we go through these 5 steps, it actually builds the kids' knowledge, awareness, and ability to construct an idea, construct a project, and hopefully implement a project either in their classroom, their school, or in some situations in their community. When we get to the implementing part, a lot of people look at, or a lot of teachers question, what resources are available, how much scope will I allow the kids to do this work. And that's something that we do emphasise in those teacher notes, is setting the context up front, creating those boundaries and being clear with those boundaries is really important at the beginning of this process. It's not a boundaryless piece of learning, and essentially no piece of learning is. So as the students go through these 5 steps, they learn about the issue, they think about what sorts of projects, interventions, actions they can take that are appropriate for their school, they develop one of those ideas into a plan, they put it in place, and then they reflect on it. And I'll just go to the reflection and the evaluation tab. And we've got two sets of questions in here. One of the things that we thought was, quite often we have young people doing sustainability activities where they do the activity and essentially that's the end of the learning for a lot of the kids. And we thought that it was essential that they do some kind of evaluation of, well, how effective was our sustainability action? So if they're doing something like a resource management piece, water, energy, waste or something like that, that may then entail a whole new set of auditing or measuring just to see if they've had some kind of impact. The second part was a little bit more, I suppose, difficult to structure. We definitely wanted to have a situation quite specifically identified as that meta evaluation, that metacognitive approach of, well, I've learnt, what have I learnt through this action process? Why was this a good way of learning? Was it any better than me sitting and listening to the teacher for the last 4 weeks? Was it better than me doing something else? And so it's actually taking kids, or allowing kids to stretch into that higher order thinking of reflecting on their own learning and reflecting on its value. So I think that last part here, reflecting on the learning with the set of questions there, I think that's one of the most critical part of this. Okay, so that is that document. As I said, we will bring them all onto, we'll get everyone, get the message advertised far and wide when they're made available. The first 6 are already available, but we haven't actually announced that yet because we're waiting for all 14 to be available. So we might move on. Part of our evaluation did actually want teachers to rate this kind of learning and to give us their feedback. And, on the whole, that feedback was quite positive. Again, in some of these statements, the teachers did identify themselves as, they relied on the process, even though they may not have known so much about sustainability. And I suppose I should acknowledge the great work that UTS Faculty of Education did in the evaluation of that program at those 2 milestones. So some more discussion. Some more discussion questions. Will we manage this in the same way, Peter?
Yes, sure, Mark. That'd be fine. Maybe let me see. Has anyone got a quick chat for me to let me know they have a question? I'm going to quickly scan the pictures and see if anyone's looking like they have one. Hillary, off we go with you. Thank you.
Sorry, once again, it's not so much a question. Oh, sorry, it might be a question, but it's a statement as well. Mark, have you thought about building in reflection and metacognition at each of the stages of the investigation rather than at the end, just for reflection? And again, I hark back, I'm sorry, to the Telstar model and social investigation strategy in Queensland. I'd love to dig out that research again that was done that actually came up with that model, but the thinking behind it was a step further for student-directed learning is that the students get to reflect at each of the stages, so they actually get to reflect on the investigation questions that they've set for themselves and maybe change those questions on collection of data, for example, this collection of data or library research, again, reflecting, have we got enough, do we have to go back and change the questions and so on. So the feedback loop reflection happens each of the stages rather than going through the process and then just doing the reflection and metacognition at the end.
Yes, one of the things, as I said, we had UTS evaluated at 2 different mileposts in the project, and in the middle one, we actually had a lot of the teachers saying, I'm not sure, and this was the teacher saying, I'm not sure if the kids are ready to progress to the next stage. And we wanted to keep the 5, I suppose, sections of that process quite specific, because we thought that the learning behaviours you demonstrate or need for each of those, is not discrete, but it's quite, it's different for each one. We then built in some of those reflective questions at the end of each stage. So typically they would be things like at the end of the first investigation, finding out kind of stage. It is, do we have enough information or do we know enough to progress to the next stage to put our thinking or our ideas into a plan? And so there's a number of little stop points where it's a specific reflection stop sign that says to kids, okay, let's think about what we've learnt so far. Can we confidently proceed? And the primary questions are stated a little bit differently to the secondary questions, but we do have that stop in there to encourage that reflection of, I'm just about to change the mode of learning. Do I have enough to actually change that mode confidently? Thanks, Hilary.
David, you've got some comments you want to make.
Yes, it's just an observation back to my past. I was involved in over a decade ago in the Values Education Initiative across Australia. And it's interesting going to meetings where teachers were talking about what they'd done and how how the students had changed their behaviour, not really understanding that because the teacher had changed their behaviour, the students were reacting differently. And I think that's, obviously, they were talking about the students' change. In actual fact, I was observing is the teacher was seeing their role as a teacher differently and different results. That's all.
I haven't heard it phrased like that, David, but now I have heard it phrased like that. That would answer why we had teachers who engaged in the 5-year project multiple times. We had the same teachers doing it 2 or 3 times. A couple of teachers used it with different classes. And the teachers, now that you've said that, I actually do think that the teachers changed their approaches as well. Yeah, thank you. So I think they saw the value in that particular learning approach, and they were as much a process learner as the kids were going through that approach.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's really important. When we were doing all that professional development through the 90s, there were a lot of teachers who you could take through a process and you could give them the resources to do it, and they would do it, and they would get a really good outcome and get really interested and then do it again. There was another group of teachers who were able to do that once and then were able to take it over and do it themselves in different contexts and in different processes and in different areas of the curriculum. And one of the things that I find really interesting in talking to teachers up here at the moment is there's this enormous political pressure on them to, through the curriculum stuff, to teach like English and maths for the first 3 hours of the day, and then you can do some other stuff after that. And when you actually put the questions, like we had this discussion with some of the teachers at Waggaman when we're doing the biodiversity pilot there. So what's maths? And what are you doing in maths? And why can't measuring the length of a frillneck's tail be maths? And they said, well, of course it's maths. And I said, but you guys don't think it like that when you're programming your maths. You think about what you're being pushed down politically. And this whole issue of curriculum integration, I think, is, you know, I still hear, like I was at a workshop a few months ago now, and they're still talking about the problems of an overcrowded curriculum. And, you know, this issue of curriculum integration seems to have flown out the back door, and people are under, and this may be different in other systems, which is part of why I'm asking this question, is how does that curriculum integration concept fit into the different state systems now in terms of when I'm doing an hour of mathematics on Thursday morning, am I allowed to be doing sustainability or biodiversity stuff as part of that process with a focus on some of the math concepts? Or when I'm mapping across kids being able to do their own stuff, how do I handle those sorts of issues, and how does the system support me? And like my principal's got to have a look at my program, how do I satisfy those political connotations? You're just interested to hear where people are at with that in each of the states.
Yeah, any comments on that, people?
I'm just scanning for hands or nods or anything in photos. Snowy, do you have anything? Sorry to put you on the spot. That's pretty terrible. You can say no.
Look, in Far North Queensland, we are very much into explicit instruction. You may not have heard of John Fleming. So it's a very didactic approach, and we don't teach anything except for maths and English and 1 hour of science. So there is certainly, well, for example, my husband tomorrow is taking his class to the Great Barrier Reef, but it's an end of year, school finishes on Friday. So they're doing it on Thursday. So fantastic. And you can't say that there's no learning, because everything's a learning experience, yeah. But I said, oh, well, why don't you do a whole unit around the Great Barrier Reef, and rather than go at the end, go right at the beginning of the term, use it as a data collection, and then go back out at the end of the term to reconcile. But yeah, it's beyond our capacity at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Snowy. Hillary, yes.
Sorry, me again. I put a comment there about basically I think professional development needs to build the capacity of teachers towards metacognition as much as it does the students' capacity for metacognition. Because again, I'm not really truly involved in schools at the moment, but I suspect that my comments will reflect something that hasn't changed very much, because I think that once teachers have that really top-class professional development in an area, and they have built their capacity to metacognition, and they have then preferred models that they know can work and can link with the curriculum, that teachers will continue to use the good models and basically tick off the bits that will address the curriculum regardless. So in other words, they will backfit what they can do. So if they only have success with didactic teaching and forced into those boxes, then that's probably what will happen. If they have great success stories and have built their own capacity to do social investigation or sustainable investigation strategies and have success, then they will use that. And a great role model for this is Ron Tooth at Environment Education Centre, Coolumbar Environment Education Centre. Ron is an old colleague of mine. He basically says, I don't care what they call it, this new model, because I will just continue to use what I've used and I know that works. And he had this fantastic ability to just, rebadge it, use the new jargon words, use a new investigation strategy, but still do that, good process of curriculum that he was always doing. So I think that to me is the key to it, is to actually build the capacity of the teachers and the success of those strategies as much as anything.
Thanks very much, Hilary. Maybe Mark, we'll just throw back to you for a bit of a wrap up, but I guess I'll give a bit of a Victorian perspective. Gosh, we're keeping it fairly East Coast, no pressure South Australia or Western Australia, but I was really pleased to hear in the model about the learning journal, because I noticed that in our year 11 and 12 study design or curriculum, we're really encouraging students to take or set up investigations of their own and to keep data logged in a logbook. So I think it's really nice to see those strategies coming out in these kind of activities. So with that comment, I'll hand back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Peter. Just to, I'll finish typing my comment on that one. The Learning Journal came from a cluster of teachers. We had, in a couple of situations in this Climate Clever project that we did all those years ago, we actually had groups of schools working together, and sometimes they would do collaborative professional learning based on this project. We had a little cluster in southwest Sydney that teachers in a few schools were getting their kids to write down, and they were writing. I remember seeing these journals, and they were beautiful because on the one side of the page they would write the stuff that they were learning, like the facts and figures and the science stuff, and on the other side they would do a little bit of a statement on, was it fun, why did they like it, those sorts of things, fairly light. But then through that sort of approach, we put a little bit of more rigor to it. They actually wanted to do it. They were not being self-serving, but they had a principle that didn't particularly support practical science and technology being taught in primary classrooms. And so by having evidence of the kids saying, yes, we liked doing this science experiment, they would say to the principal then, look, our kid, this is something that our kids enjoy. The Learning Journal has been a really important part of some teachers when they've got the kids to go back and reflect. So when we've got a few, there's a middle question there. Is it an issue of educational pedagogical leadership? Is it an issue of will, or is it an issue of evidence that holds us back from doing this sort of stuff? And part of me, and the one that I didn't put in there, quite deliberately didn't put in there, is it an issue of pre-service teacher education that also doesn't open those sorts of doors? Look, I haven't been involved in pre-service teacher ed for many years, so I didn't want to put that in there. But I do know that whoever said all three, yes, it is all three. And the educational pedagogical leadership, that comes from the principal, it comes from head teachers, it comes from teachers of curriculum, it comes from stage head teachers, it comes from, whoever is leading whoever is your educational leader in your school or your faculty or your classroom, whatever. It starts with them, and it's all about them looking at, can they find a system that is actually going to get more for the kids out of the same time and the same, amount of learning? Is it an issue of evidence? Maybe, maybe not. I think there's loads of evidence around about this sort of stuff, but I don't know if we actually have the evidence of teacher to teacher, peer to peer, talking to each other to say, hey, listen, I've done this in my classroom and it really worked. I've got these kids who really love this approach. Is it an issue of will? Yes, it is, you know, and that there's no easy solution for. In terms of reducing the barriers, as we roll out, as we publish these materials, we are also getting one of the environmental education centres to put together a short how-to video. We're getting them to run and record a number of Adobe Connect or online professional learning sessions that will talk and walk teachers through this, and then we will run some professional learning, hopefully fingers crossed, through either you know, the Sustainable Schools Network, or through the Departments of Education, or through A²E². Who knows? That part of it is yet to be determined. I have kept, and this is with my Department of Environment work hat on now, I have kept a small amount of funding set aside specifically for professional learning. If we receive a great proposal from an organisation that might say, these are great learning materials, can we roll out a small professional learning program for you in New South Wales or nationally? But, you know, you didn't hear that from me. And then the last thing there, someone else was mentioning, I'm not sure who it was, that metacognition is not just for the kids. And so we also need to, thank you, Hilary. We also need to be thinking of, well, what actually keeps us on our toes in terms of being a practitioner and being current, you know, knowing the approaches that will engage kids, knowing the approaches that will be effective, that will create, you know, young people that are, you know, agents of their own learning. And so I think, you know, that last question there, I think, is equally important for us as practitioners and equally important for us as an association. Okay, should we throw the floor open again?
Great, thanks, Mark. Just having a scan here to see if anyone is indicating they're interested in having a chat or asking a question or challenging you with a comment. Graham, how about you?
Yeah, look, Mark, I'm really interested in this issue because we're building this little pilot project at the moment using an e-learning system to try and get teachers through, and I've got a meeting with a couple of principals this week and some others about, okay, over the next 8 weeks or so you're not at school, and some of the principals will be for a period preparing for next year, and what are the triggers that might get them to spend some time thinking about this sustainability, biodiversity issue with the overarching or the cross-curriculum priority in the national curriculum, and have time to reflect on what they might do and how they might do it. So I'm interested to see how that model might impact on people and the sorts of content and the sorts of materials that are in it. We're also hoping, because it's in an e-learning system that allows us to take responses from people, I'm hoping that we can use some of those pieces to ask some questions which the answers to are more for our own benefit than they are from the actual people involved in the process, to try and get a bit of a handle on people's headspace. So I'm really interested in how that process works with teachers now. I know up here in 20 odd years ago or 15 years ago, when I was actually part of the system, there was quite a bit of support for professional development, as it's called up here. But since the first round of expenditure review cuts and so forth, and then the sort of 10 more of those they've had since, professional development basically doesn't exist anymore. And it's now a responsibility of the teachers to do their own. And they have to report on that, but it's their responsibility. So I'm just curious to see whether this e-learning approach might help some of those people fit that into their incredibly busy schedules, if we can make it interesting enough. But also I'm interested in what's happening in the other states with that sort of stuff.
I'm typing an answer that everyone will be able to read in just a sec. In New South Wales, our environmental education centres are actually building this approach into their current two sort of professional learning products that they roll out to teachers, quite often.
Might just throw to Cam, who is keen to make a comment, and maybe that leads on from here. Cam, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, Mark, when you mentioned the environmental education centres, we've done a fair amount of work around our pedagogy and ways of working in practice through 2 ARC linkage research grants. And I've been told by all the professionals in the research fraternity, if you get 1 ARC research grant, you're doing well in your entire career. Well, our cohort of centres have had 2, and the product of the second one is going to be published next May, we hope. So the centres have actually looked at this question around best practice and pedagogy, but more from the point of view of their context of place. So let's just put that in a context. It's not necessarily the classroom pedagogy, it's more about learning beyond the classroom pedagogy. So that's just something there. It's a nice segue to what you just said, Mark, about these practitioners in the field. We've got 117 outdoor and environmental education teachers and principals across the state who are doing some great work. But my question and comment would be about what we've just heard so far around the historical engagement in a lot of these processes and projects and programs, and the really rich work we did back in the day, inverted commas. But what's happening now? What's contemporary that's really engaging teachers to go beyond the rigours of the crowded curriculum and the National Australian curriculum and all the pressures there? I do hear that we are now progressing from the individual and the primary area I'm talking about now, the individual learning areas of geography, history, citizenship, economics now to now humanities and social sciences. So we're going from SOS to no SOS to HAS over the last 10 or 15 years. So when I heard early on the conversation around the project-based and integrated learning, is there capacity to build a bridge to the next generation of implementation of curriculum through best practice of pedagogy with the release of HAS? Is there an opportunity, a window that we could take all these examples of projects and programs that have happened around the nation and say, here it is, new learning area, here's a way of investigating and embedding that as a project-based learning approach or whatever. That was just a thought that came to my mind.
I'm certainly interested in that comment, Cam, and I know that a lot of the work we've been doing in Victoria out of Deakin University is to think about ways of bringing contemporary science into our science classrooms and schools, and thinking about real life, I kind of hate that term, but real life applications of mathematics through science and other ways of knowing and learning. So that's certainly something we're really interested in. And I notice a bit of a dearth of some of that thinking in some of this sustainability work. You know, it's almost like we're trying to say, this stuff is known and we have some of the answers here, students come and learn it. And that's why I'm interested in action-based pedagogy, stuff that encourages students to learn through doing, because I think that brings the practices of science and of learning to the fore, and it allows us to think carefully about how is it that we come to know, and how do we, in those decisions about what we know, make value decisions about what's important. So thanks for indulging me in those thoughts, and maybe I'll throw to Hilary, who was keen to make some comments.
It's just something that's occurred to me as I'm sitting here, and it's a comment about opportunities. And it's not so much also restricted just to teacher professional development, but I was thinking about the area that I was heavily immersed in for the 5-7 years before I retired was transition pedagogy, and particularly first year in higher education. And this was really actually targeting all students going into universities or education facilities like that. So this is a big growing area at the moment, and it's becoming quite prominent. And universities, the bureaucracies behind universities are very much into it as well, because it actually addresses their targets with student success and retention. And I know Matt is really interested in this for Northern Territory, because he's doing a first year course in sustainability as part of this approach. But it occurred to me that, of course, I was thinking that at QUT, when I was there, I was trying to actually get sustainability as one of the principles that was QUT-wide in transition pedagogy, as being one of those principles that therefore appears in all of the courses at higher education at QUT. It was a big ask, and I don't think I obviously, managed that in the 2 years that I was there. But it presents an opportunity anyway. That maybe I know that a lot of people working in that area are not people who are active in the sustainability field. So it's a possible opportunity, crossover area that could be looked into.
Well, thank you. I'm just having one final scan to see if we have any hands up, and we are looking pretty good. It looks like I'm saluting you. I'm not. It's very sunny here in Victoria. It's unusual and we're enjoying it. So maybe I'll hand back to you, Mark, to wrap up our session, and then we'll move on to the next part of our agenda. So back to you, Mark. You're on mute still, Mark.
Here we go. Now listen to my beautiful voice. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Look, we understand that this is a work in progress, actually, and part of the message that from the professional learning is that, and one thing that we haven't really covered today is that we've produced a set of resources that are simply the scaffold and will guide teachers and students through that process. What we haven't talked about is the context through which the teacher should teach this. And that we don't define, because the teacher knows their class, their students best, and the teacher knows the context of their school and their local community that will work best. So, whether we talk about this through, whether we get a teacher to do the waste and materials, investigation, and they use container deposit legislation that's coming into New South Wales in July, that'd be a great thing for some kids to do. But we haven't defined that. We haven't said this is what you should do. So we do see the flexibility. We also have included in the notes is that teachers can add, subtract, modify any of that questioning scaffold, and include, of course, any of their own resources that they think are important for this. So we see this as, I suppose, a baseline that has flexibility to change and adapt and be modified by teachers. And we've put the material out there in a format that we think will allow teachers the flexibility to do that. Most importantly, though, is this conversation that we've had over the last few years with the environmental education centres. Is we believe this is one of our solutions or approaches to having kids being much more proactive, much more engaged, being agents of their own learning, and thinking that they actually have a point of entry into what appear to be complex, difficult, large, gnarly sustainability issues. And if we can actually find points of entry for kids to take action at a local level, a school level, a classroom level, a personal or home level, then we think that these are appropriate ways to go. So you'll see that we haven't got one of these learning objects on climate change, for example. It is one of those issues that is big and gnarly. Limited points of entry for kids, unless we talk about energy efficiency, and that's the point of entry into climate change for them. Just to finish off, there's a few little references and readings. Although there's only a handful there, plus the two that were included in the other ones before. This is an ongoing conversation that we are having in New South Wales. It's a good, robust, professional conversation amongst practitioners at the Environmental Education Centres, Department of Education, Office of Environment, and in schools. And so this is, we are still within, the middle of this conversation, and it will keep going. And I think it's appropriate that it keeps going. So, thanks very much for, I suppose, indulging me and letting me, show off where we are to date. But it will move and it will change. As we finish up this little section, are there any last questions or comments that anyone wants to ask or say or anything? Otherwise, I'll be quiet and we'll move on to our next.
Well, I think, can everyone join me in thanking Mark very much for that fantastic presentation? Mark, perhaps you could take your screen off viewing and we can, yeah, perfect. We can see everyone again. Now we can see everyone. Let's thank Mark again. Awesome. I wish we got a screen capture of that. That was very cool. Well, really, thank you to everyone as well for joining in on such an interesting conversation, but also interesting format. And how cool that we've managed to join people together from across our country today and explore some of these issues and really dig into an example that facilitates or really exemplifies an awful lot of work that's going on in our work lives, in our interest and passions, and sort of for us generally as people of Australia and educators of Australia, I guess. So thank you again. We're going to now spend a few minutes, maybe about 10, just checking in on the chapters. Part of how we ended up being in learning circles, my mistake for the confusion about knowing circles. I'm not sure really what happened there. Anyway, I think we're focused on learning circles again. David, do you want to have a chat about that?
No, but we just talked about, initially we talked about knowing circles.
I have another program called Learning Circles, and last night Mark said something and suddenly I went, oh, have I confused the two? But I did go back to our notes today, and just to confirm, we then moved into a Learning Circle language. So I'm pleased to confirm we're doing Learning Circles. The second part of our Learning Circle, apart from sharing on an issue that was relevant to someone who would present and then lead a discussion, was then to bring in our chapters and ask them to share some of the highlights that might be going on for them. When I sent out the invitation very recently to this, you'll notice that there was a chapter report. Thank you very much to reps like WA, ACT, New South Wales, and Queensland. Hillary, my goodness, how could I forget? That's right. Who went to great efforts to update their report for us. Thanks very much to the other state reps who I used their report from September, and some of them made special notice, like Matt in Northern Territory and Megan in South Australia, that not much has changed since September, so that's really relevant. I also want to draw your attention to the New South Wales report. They are quite interested in leading a conversation amongst us here where they're suggesting that they're reporting regularly anyway, and they have a report that was captured in a table as well as an infographic. So if you have a look at that document that I sent round and just enjoy for a moment that little infographic, I think that's a nice presentation strategy, and it kind of challenges us to think about how are we collecting this information that we want to share, why are we collecting this information, and can we do it in a way that is easier and maybe facilitates better conversation. So I want to acknowledge that WA has always presented, since I've been in this role, an amazing report, partly because they're so incredibly active for quite a small group, but also because I know people like Claire make the effort to really flesh out their report with good detail. So perhaps we need to think about, as we listen to our chapter highlights, is there a better way that we can share this information? Is it about perhaps creating some kind of form that we can fill in. What does this space in our process need to look like? Is it about sharing highlights? Is it about up and coming events that we want others to know about? Is it about celebrating successes, or even presenting challenges and having us all contribute to some thinking there? So maybe if we run this next session with just a little hand up if you've got something to contribute, and then we'll throw to you. And so we're looking at chapter reports, chapter information, and also ideas about this process. Any thoughts? David, over to you.
Just briefly, we're having our AGM tomorrow and a picnic in the Botanic Park. And by the time we have that, the weather will be okay and be wet in Melbourne, but we'll be right.
Nice. I love the weather as a competition. Excellent. I suspect you'll win. Yes, actually, fantastic. Megan made mention of your up and coming AGM, and also that she thought everyone had been quite tired in the interim, but I hope that you're all recovering now after such a fantastic conference. And perhaps we'll hand over to Hilary, who has some news for us from Queensland.
Yeah, we had our AGM last night, which is why we're all a bit tired. No, actually, our AGM was probably the quickest one on record. It went for 20 minutes. So we had an annual report. I know, unbelievable. We had an annual report that was sent out beforehand, so all of the reports were tabled as read and so on. So, and I sent through to Peter, the newly elected member. So I'm still liaison person, because we adopted the constitutional suggestion at the conference about the liaison officers having a 2-year term. Yeah, so I won't go into all everything else that happened, but we had our AGM last night. It was very successful. I can't think of any other highlights. Oh, sorry, yes, and we have postponed a meeting with we have an opening and a diary penciled in date for a discussion with the Director General of the Department of Environment and Heritage Protection in early next year, so that we wanted to postpone it so that we could include the conference as part of those discussions. That's
fantastic. Thank you very much, Hilary. That's great to hear about the activities of Queensland and a nice strategy put in place. I'm wondering, without putting you under pressure, Sorel or Claire, if either of you might be interested in giving us an update from your stage. Sorel's happy? Okay, so why don't we go with you first? Does it seem that Sorel has now frozen? Yep. Okay, Claire, are you ready? Maybe. Oh no, Sorel, you've frozen. Can you? Yes, there you go. Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Sorry, I totally lost you. We also had our AGM we actually had it at the beginning of November. We had a number of our committee of management actually retire, but we've got 4 new committee management members for the next 2 years, which is great. We have Renee Walton, who's continuing on as president, and we have Josh Ambrosi, who's actually joined us for the vice president role. He's been working with us for the last, I would say, 4 years now. We had a great presentation with, well, I have to say a great presentation, because one of my work colleagues came and presented on Victorian local species and challenged the audience with encouraging their students to acknowledge that we have local Victorian species and to get to know them a little bit better. I did want to join in something that happened, I suppose, more on a personal level rather than a sort of network level, and that was we ran a education program with Zoos Victoria throughout the last 3 months, and it was a Turn Orange event. And we found, like, with all this talk on project-based learning, we actually had 230 schools from across Australia sign up and participate in this Turn Orange for Orangutans event, where we sent out packs to each of the schools that registered. And it was quite an open kind of, I suppose, educational content inside. And we aligned that to the vote that was happening to the clear labelling of palm oil. What we found worked really well with that was that it appealed to everyone from childcare up to tertiary institutions, and we had the full spectrum represented. And what it allowed the students to do was to take the issue and be able to demonstrate in whatever way that they felt was possible for them within their community, and the capacity that the teachers had to run with this program. And the reports that we got back from all over Australia of students taking action was extraordinary. And we like to think that the Victorian government has now made a pledge that they will vote for the clear labelling of palm oil. And we're hoping that I think we had almost 160 schools in Victoria sending letters and posters and emails to our health minister. We're hoping that that actually made a difference. So when we were talking about project-based learning, I felt really bad coming in at the end of it because I only saw the last 2 slides. But that's how we try to encourage our, I suppose, cohort to participate. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
And I'm pleased to say Sorel is staying on as our liaison, which is fantastic. So thank you very much, Sorel. Claire, how about over to you? Is that okay?
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, so from WA, late in November was the WA Sustainable Educators Forum. That was a bit of a first, and it was apparently very successful with a cross-section of attendees from schools, community, education department, universities and other state government programs. So I believe a report's getting written up about that, and a story will be put in to go in the AAEE News for next year. And we're happy because the CCC Catchments, Corridors and Coasts is already fully subscribed. So that's the PD 3-day course for teachers, students, educators to get a real snapshot of environmental education opportunities in WA. So that's the 22nd year in a row that that's been running. So that's sort of what's been going on with us. We haven't had a WA meeting since the AGM. Our last meeting had to be postponed, but I'll be continuing as the state liaison, just to let you know. That's about it.
That's great. Thanks very much, Claire. And thanks again for your detailed and always on-time reports. Fantastic effort. Anyone else from a chapter wanting to give comment? Okay, Mark, yes, excellent. You've read my message. Fantastic. I might throw to you and ask if there is any national executive update that we would like to share with our colleagues here.
Hi everyone, thanks very much Peter, thanks for facilitating this. Just a couple of little updates from the National Executive. A number of sort of fairly mechanical issues. First, with the change in our constitution at the Adelaide conference, we've had to send some of those constitutional changes through to a range of authorities and organisations who give us various permissions and all of that sort of stuff to operate. So, you know, fair trading and all those sorts of people. We're still going back and forth a little bit with the Office of Environment for the registered environmental organisations issue. They just want a secondary piece of information about those constitutional changes and the fact that they essentially don't change the nature and purpose of our organisation. Had a lovely chat with David and then with Hugh from South Australia about the outcome of the conference. So we're just awaiting the final report from the conference organisers, and there'll also be a little bit of profit being shared by South Australia and the national body. And probably the last piece of information, which is one that isn't so great, is that our wonderful National Administration Officer, Kate Elder, is leaving. Her family business requires someone full-time, and she's taking that opportunity. You may have noticed in the bulletin the other day that came out, there was the advertisement for someone to fill Kate's role, and so currently we're looking for someone with the skills included in that little advertisement. So please, if you know someone who has some administration experience, someone that you know is passionate about the environment, any of those sorts of skills, please let them know. It's a 20-hour-a-week position. We're very flexible with where that position is located and how that person communicates with the executive. So hopefully you know someone fantastic out there that can, who might be interested to do that work. I don't know if there's anything else that's absolutely burning from the national executive. It's been fairly quiet also since the conference in Adelaide, which I must say personally I really, really enjoyed. And again, thank you to that fantastic South Australian crew. Great time, great food, great wine. Thank you, David and team. Any questions from anyone about anything that's been going on at the national level? Hilary.
Not a question, just a statement, also backing up Queensland's thanks to Kate for the outstanding role that she did with administration for all of the states and territories, but just to add the happy note that Kate is still being involved in A²E² as she was elected general membership at the Queensland AGM last night.
That's great to hear. Any other conversations or any other topics, questions that you'd like to ask or issues you'd like to raise? Okay. Are there any other items of business that we need to cover off on this afternoon, Peter?
Yes, Mark, there's one more, and that's just to review the process of how we've gone today in our learning circles. So if it's okay, I might ask for a couple of questions and get your thoughts and opinions about our first A²E² National Learning Circle, and just with the idea of shaping our process. This was definitely our first, and we're really pleased that you've turned up today and helped us trial our process and certainly engaged with the great content that you've offered, Mark. But in terms of, I guess, let me first go through the process. Was Zoom easy enough to use? Maybe just go with thumbs up, yes, no in the middle. Are we happy with Zoom as a platform? I know Sorel had some troubles, but okay, that's generally pretty good. What about the format for the day, in that we start with a presentation, the presentation asks questions and has time for interaction throughout, and we spend probably about 40 to 50 minutes on the presentation. Is that about the right time? A few thoughts. Mark, maybe would you like to have a comment to offer your thoughts on that one?
I perhaps could have been a bit shorter and sharper, I think. So maybe contracting the time and being a little bit more targeted with my questioning. But, anyway, we live and learn.
I think you're just being self-critical, but that's okay. Maybe could I ask this? If we count every finger as a 10-minute time slot, how many total should be our presentation and discussion to dig into a deep issue that's relevant to us in some way? Like, would it be 40 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes? What do you think? Let me have a visual representation. We're getting some 40s, 50s, 50s. 40. What's that, David? Why have you got your hand there? Is that a 0? 40. Excellent. Oh, well, that's some good feedback. Thank you. What about this this mistake that I made around learning circles and knowing circles? Are we thumbs up for learning circles? Do we feel that's a good name? Is everyone comfortable with our intention there? Does anyone have a comment to make? Okay, good. We're settled. What about the meeting regularity? So we thought we would... Oh, Dave, did you want to have a comment? Okay, what about the regularity then? So if we plan to host these every 3 months as an opportunity again to bring us together, to have conversation, for it to be more of a two-way engagement rather than a reporting process. Does every 3 months seem okay? What about a thumbs up or a question, some comment there? Dave would like to have a comment. Over to you.
I think keep it 3 at that time, but also the opportunity if these issues come, if things come up we need to discuss. Someone has something they want a discussion around something important, then we do that. So, but we do what we're saying is we do a minimum of 3 or 4 times a year.
Nice, thanks very much. So, Mark.
I know we've got mostly our reps with us, and today was a little bit of a test. It'll be interesting to see how we extend this invitation then to our broader membership, and then what the functionality of Zoom is like. If we say, you know, if we've got 10 today, if we had 40 people online, say, for example. So, and I don't know if we'll know that until we actually do a test.
I had a conversation with a person, Tom Linnell from the Tennyson College in Mount Gambier, about he was talking about why would he join A squared E squared, and I suggested that these type of forums are an example why he should, because he says he's talking about joining the South Australian chapter, but he says it's time-wise, it's too expensive. Time and money-wise, it's too expensive. So I think we actually, for us, and I realise that Queensland has Western Australia have even bigger issues than that, but it's a matter of actually how we do it and we promote it. And hopefully within meeting 3 next year, a person who hasn't really been really active in our national level is leading one of these discussions.
Beautiful segue, Dave. Thank you. So our next meeting then would ideally be in March sometime. Are there any topics, or would anyone feel like they have something they would like to share or put on the table and be a provocateur about? From the floor here, are there any suggestions?
Peter, I don't know if you can hear me.
You can.
Yeah, sorry, my handsome mug is not on your screen, but my internet connection keeps saying weak, so you haven't got the leverage of my presence in FaceTime. But I'd like to offer the reflections on my international sojourn to Maryland with regards to the World Future Council's identification of their environmental literacy standards. I did a very brief presentation to the principals of the Outdoor Environmental Education Centres last week. I could modify that, especially that'll be nicely connected with regards to what Mark has done in the New South Wales case study that links to the sustainability curriculum framework for policy advisors and our cross-curricular priority and sustainability. This is going like leap years ahead with regards to how they've embedded the practice of their environmental literacy standards across the state of Maryland as a result of the Barack Obama's administration about leave no child in sight. So I could do a quick presentation that gives us a context. That could be a catalyst towards, well, what could that look like in the Australian context? So I'd like to offer that as a opportunity for the next learning circle. And I'll have another quick comment to make too, if I may. Okay. quite interesting. It's the revised format of our conversations and meetings here, because it almost paralleled exactly what the Outdoor and Environmental Education Centre Principals Alliance have done over the last 2 or 3 meetings. We meet once a quarter, 4 times a year, face-to-face for a couple, webinars for others, and we really revisited our modus operandi around almost a similar model of a check-in, a professional presentation. We had Dr. Joe Ferreira and Dr. Glenn from Sunshine Coast University, who presented on contemporary ways of working in the outdoor and environmental education context. Very similar to what Marcus did. So it's just amazing the parallels of processes around building more professional capacity building within the group. And yeah, the challenges, I think, are twofold. One that Marcus mentioned about the quantum and management. The other one is I'm sitting at work at the moment because of the time variations and also Western Australia time variations. So we're always going to have that bridge around a large nation geographically and impacts on work access to resources. I can't show video in my work. It's just so limited access. So they're my comments.
Thanks very much, Cam. Certainly appreciate your offer, and we'll take you up for March, I think. Are there any other offers of people here present today who would have contributions or things that they would like to talk about? Graham?
Yeah, I think it'd be really good to do one on biodiversity issues in education and the whole biophilia type notion, where it's at and how you break it.
And are you offering to host that discussion?
Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much. Sorel, is that you putting your hand up? No. Well, I certainly ask again, are there any other offers of topics or thoughts around presentations? Not going, oh, Claire, great. Yes, we'll hear from you.
It was more of an idea of taking it to the WA committee and putting it out there to the larger group to see if they've got some ideas of useful topics.
Yeah, sensational idea, and really ask if you could please be our advocates for this beginning process. We are planning to develop a platform on our website that will host the recordings from the sessions and the information about the dates and the topics and any of the resources that come from our presentations too. So watch this space. But I think now that we've had our first go and tested it out, we've got some good thoughts about how to go from here. So acknowledging that it's now 5:34, David, a couple of comments to wrap up.
Yeah, just one little bit. I think what might come out too is it's possible on the website have places for discussions pre this, which could then lead into a detailed conversation afterwards. So it's actually this type of session becomes a part of that, bringing things together we've had beforehand, rather than simply just having this and then going away.
Yeah.
So I think we hope for that one next year would come from that type of discussion.
Yep, great suggestion and some good functionality for us to consider at this point. Hilary, you have a comment?
It was very similar to what Mark and David was saying. I was also thinking I would actually send information out to the membership in Queensland, because I'm now also Queensland Secretary as well. And but before I did that, I would really like to have that question about the functionality of Zoom and how many people, because we wouldn't want to sort of spread it out, have millions of people interested in it, and then sort of like over promising and under delivering again. So it'd be really good if someone can notify or find out what the functionality is.
Thank you very much. We'll certainly we have a meeting next week at the National Executive, and we will post some questions and place some follow-up in place. I think to be concerned about the capacity of Zoom is appropriate. We may have to look at changing our registration position, and that's fine. We will certainly look at that. So if I could ask maybe to look at our next bulletin, I hope that will certainly carry an update from today and suggest how we're moving forward, and then we'll also be looking to develop that functionality on our site, and then we'll make sure that we share that initially through our chapter liaisons, and then more broadly if possible. So any final thoughts? Okay, well, once again, thank you very much. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, once again, thank you to Mark. Really appreciate the effort you've gone to make today such a fantastic success. Thank you very much to everybody who turned up. Really love that we get to connect around Australia. It's such a special thing. And thank you to Cam for reminding me to suggest Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope you get some kind of break and enjoy some kind of warm weather, and look after yourselves. And we will talk to you again soon. And hi to Hillary's dog. Thank you very much.